recording. Perfect. Well, welcome everyone. Happy sunny Thursday. We don't have too many of those left in Washington, at least. So thanks for joining us. We've got a full crowd today, and then there's just a bunch of people joining from one, so we'll probably have Dez probably 25 people with us. So it's definitely a big turnout. So thank you for joining us and hanging out with us and saying yes. So I don't typically like to play favorites, but if I had to pick my top three, Dez is definitely in there. And I think he would say the same thing about me. So
I was going to ask, Britt, do you say that about everyone now? I gotta.
This is recorded, so it's never happened. I've never said it, but you are definitely in my top three, and you can definitely tell everybody I'm in yours.
Of course.
So BD before Dez, I had no, I just made that up. I had no tools in my toolbox for public speaking. If you don't believe me, go back to my first intro with SDA back a year ago. So that is all because of you, Dez. If you haven't figured it out yet, we're talking about communication skills. So how many, by show of real hands or Zoom hands, honestly experience a little bit of fear when we talk about public speaking? There's a lot of cameras off, so I can't get a full count, but we've got half-ish. So either the other half who doesn't have fear are unicorns or liars.
We're gonna make them speak, Britt. We're gonna put them on the spot. See,
and he will. He put me on the spot a lot, which I appreciate. So, public speaking is fundamental to your industry, to your career, your professional development, and also the people around you. If you can increase your personal impact through speaking, you can lead the people around you with more excellence. And that's what Dez does. There are certain skills and patterns that, if applied, it can make a speech or presentation amazing. So if you apply the lessons that Dez is going to teach us here today, no matter your age or your industry, you can literally transform where you are to where you want to be. You might even like it, or we just want you to hate it a little less. That was kind of where I lived for a long time. So we're going to talk about do's and don'ts and hacks to help move you in the right direction. There are many, like a buffet. Simply pick what you think is going to help you the most, because it's going to be packed with it, and so you don't have to take everything from this. You might already be awesome. I'm going to hype Dez up for like 3 minutes, just because I know you won't, Dez. But
don't set the bar too high, Britt.
So when Dez was 9, he forgot his lines in a church play, and he never forgot the embarrassment and humiliation he felt from that play, which is what led him here to learning and teaching the art of speaking. He's professionally trained at the University of South Carolina and Dale Carnegie, quite the overachiever. A past president of Georgia chapter of the National Speakers Association, the winner of Speak Tank. He's been a coach for TED, Vistage, now us, coach hundreds of professionals, coach NBA players, and he was even a public speaker at a federal prison for 7 years. So there is no better teacher on this topic. So Dez, please take it away.
Will do. Thank you, Britt. So thank you all for having me. And first point of clarification, I was visiting the prison to give those presentations. I was not in the prison.
I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that.
Giving those presentations.
I wasn't there either. So.
Seriously, I wish you all could have been there. Last Thursday, it's pouring down raining in Atlanta, where I live, and I pull up to this, what appears to be abandoned warehouse, at least on the outside. So the trees are all overgrown. There's no windows in the outside of this place. It's one of those places where if you were watching a scary movie, you would definitely be screaming, "Don't go in there." So I looked at the address to make sure that I was at the right place, and I saw some cars out front that looked familiar. So I said, well, this has got to be the place. So I walk inside, and the inside could not be more different than the outside. Inside, there was a state-of-the-art workplace or work facility, complete with a coffee shop, workstations. I mean, there were so many things going on inside. So I go inside and I'm looking around, and this place has a huge conference room in the center, all glass conference room. And I saw tables that were shaped in a U, And I also saw two flip charts at the front of the room. And in my world, that's kind of like, I'm like Pavlov's dogs. When I see that U shape in those flip charts in the front of the room, it was clear to me, this is the place where I'm supposed to be. So I walk into the room and I show up there because I'm there to visit a new client who is going to be given his first of 3 mock presentations. So later in September, this client is going to be given a presentation to a private equity group. And so I was invited to both observe and record the presentation. I shared this story with you because in that room, as I looked around that big U-shaped table, there were 14 CEOs there, one of which was the client who was presenting. And of those 14, only one was a woman. Now, in normal circumstances, that would have stood out to me a little bit, just because I was raised by a strong woman. And so I'm extra sensitive when women are around. So I got to tamp down the humor just a little bit and be on my P's and Q's because that's what I was taught. Well, since I've been engaged with Britt and she's been telling me about your industry and some of the challenges that you face in your industry, she sort of heightened my awareness to some of the challenges that women face in your industry. And so I said, I'm going to pay particularly close attention to this just to see, how things play out. And I have to admit that I was totally embarrassed by the time it was over with. The guys or the men there, and I take responsibility for being part of the male species, but they were talking, over the woman. There was no raising of the hands or anything like that. And she did one time give feedback to the presenter, and I actually thought it was the best feedback that anyone had given during the entire presentation. And so afterwards, I go up to this woman and I ask her, I said, why didn't you share a little bit more? The perspective or the insights that you shared were really profound. And she just had a face. And so the face that she had actually told me everything that I needed to know. So obviously, I can't talk to you all today about being a woman. Of course, if you can't for that, you're going to be disappointed. Let me tell you that now. However, if we go back to that room, what I can say is there was one other minority in the room, and that person was me. And so I don't know, of course, what it's like to be a woman. However, I do know what it's like to be a minority and have to work twice as hard, be twice as good, only to get half the recognition in some instances. Now, what if I told you guys that whether you're man, woman, it doesn't matter, what if the thing that you think is a disadvantage to you is actually a superpower or it's actually an advantage? And here's what I mean by that. I certainly don't mean pixie dust and rainbows and unicorns, because I know that you all are serious business people. But if you'll stay with me for a quick history lesson, if we think about the United States economy, over time, we went from an industrial society to where the people who had the physical strength were the people who had the power and had the influence. Then we evolved to an information society. And at that point in our history, the people who had access to the information the fastest and had the best information had the power and the influence. Of course, today, we all have access to information, probably more information than we would ever want. And so today we're in a new place, particularly post-pandemic, that I tend to think of as the conceptual age. And in this conceptual age, one of the things that's interesting here is the conceptual age is all about recognizing patterns, patterns in your industry, patterns in your workplace, and being able to put those patterns together to give those patterns meaning. And for me, what that really represents and the shift that I see in communication is there's more of a need for intuition in our communication. And so that's one of the things that I'm going to talk to you all about today. So my purpose is just to share a few skills with you that you can combine with your natural abilities in order to influence the thoughts as well as the behaviors of those people around you. So for the sake of an agenda, I really want to share 3 things with you just to have a conversation. The first is I want to share with you the secret that I wish I knew when I first got started in this business or in this industry. So if you think back to your first day on the job or your first day in the industry, and you think about all of the things that you know now, how much better would you be, or how many less headaches would you have if you knew some of the things now or then that you actually know now. So that's the first thing, the secret I wish I knew. The second thing is, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm going to attempt to convert you all today from public speakers to public thinkers, because I'm of the belief that the fear and anxiety and everything that we feel around public speaking, the root of that is really at the thinking level, because our thoughts precede everything that comes out of our mouths. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing that I want to share with you are just some models. Britt is going to share with you just some models that you can take away. So things that if you have to make a presentation or even have a conversation, large or small, there are several models that I'm going to share with you that you can apply to help you be successful in that effort. So we'll be together until, I know most of you are on the West Coast, so we'll be together until 1:30. And of course, we'll have time for questions afterwards. And if you have a question at any time as we're going through this, I invite you all to chime in. So I'm going to go to my slides here really quickly. Hopefully you all can see that. Can everyone see that okay?
Yeah, that looks good.
Okay. So I want to start off by really putting things in perspective and talk about the importance of communication. So there was a survey that was done, and basically what this survey did is it listed executive or it listed leadership qualities. And I always find this survey to be interesting because at the bottom third of the survey were things like listening skills, authenticity, inclusiveness, which of course are things that are important. Then that was followed by composure under stress, self-awareness, emotional intelligence. So all things that we would consider important. It's the top third where things sort of get interesting, where you see relationship building, integrity, trustworthiness, core value alignment. Again, these are all examples of leadership or executive skills. And then at the very top of it is communication skills. Now, I couldn't have made this survey up, but the thing that's most interesting to me about it, when you just think about if I were to prioritize the qualities or the things that are important when it comes to leadership, you see that communication skills is at the top. And I still have some questions about how communication skills outranks integrity. But just remember, this is not a survey that I created at all. But again, it's just to give you some perspective about how important communication is. When I have the opportunity to talk to emerging leaders or either established leaders, I always encourage them to think about the words leadership and speaking as synonymous. And here's why. The moment that you step up in front of a room, or the moment that you speak up around the conference table, or even lean into a camera, as we have to do oftentimes today, in those moments, you dramatically increase your ability to influence other people. And my primary goal for you today, if we had to put, everything that I'm going to share with you down to one word, that one word would be influence. And when I speak of influence, I'm really talking about influence from two different phases or two different angles. So one influence being influence in the thought. So that means just getting people to identify with what it is you're communicating with them, understand it, and hopefully have some type of connection with what it is you're asking them to do. So that's the thought side of influence. The other side is the active side, which is to get people to behave in a manner consistent with your expectation. So if you're a person who is doing teachbacks, for example, maybe you went to a training and learned some things that you're teaching back to your firm, then we want to persuade the way that they think and also behave based on the new information that you're going to be sharing. Or if you're a person who is doing lunch and learns, maybe on behalf of your firm to get business, and those situations as well, we want to be able to affect both the thoughts as well as the behaviors of the people that we're communicating with. So again, in a nutshell, this is all about influence. Now, one of the things that I've learned over the years in working with hundreds of different clients is if you were to ask me, Dez, show me a picture of what it looks like when people communicate today. The image that you see before you would be the picture that I would create. Now, this is the logo that I use professionally. If you know my name, which is Dez Thornton, you can make out that top line there. But the bottom line, of course, looks a little bit fuzzy. And when we communicate, what happens typically is we understand at a high level the things that people are talking about or the information that's being shared with us. But when we get down to the granular level, when we get down to the details, that's where things can get a little bit fuzzy. And so that's what this image is attempting to represent here. Now, again, as Britt said, over the years, I've worked with hundreds of leaders, many of them executives of corporations, and it's really important that we have that bottom line correct. So the things that I'm going to share with you today will help you go from a communicator that looks something like this in terms of when you communicate to more one who looks something like this when you're communicating. So something that is crystal clear. And again, those are two images that sort of represent or symbolize the way communication comes about today. Now, I said I wanted to share three things with you all, and the first of which was the secret, or the thing that I wish I knew when I first got started in this business. Now, to give you a little bit of insight into my personality, I'm an obsessive compulsive type of guy. So I'm the type of guy that has to have all of my long sleeve shirts together and all of the striped shirts together and all of the colored shirts together, right? And I absolutely drive people crazy with that. I even drive myself crazy with that. However, in my work, that has come back to serve me. And so one of the things when I was originally getting started with this work, I always had the question, and it always bugged me, that sometimes I could work with the client, and in terms of influence and hitting the target, we would be right on. And then in other instances, I could do the exact same thing and totally miss the mark. And so over time, I noticed that there was this hit or miss, and there was really no rhyme or reason or anything that I could explain about it. So I did what I always do, is I obsessed over it, right? That's like, I have to figure this thing out. And so what I want to share with you, the first thing that I wish I know, is sort of that secret to influence, and how do we ultimately get to influence. So the first thing that I want you all to think about is the words that we use. So think of words, if you will, as currency. So words are the things that we use to exchange ideas. Words are the thing that we use to give instructions. It's the thing that we use to give things meaning. So consider our words currency. Now, whenever we speak, whenever we're communicating, our words typically generate feelings. And I think of that feeling as an indicator. It could be something personal, or it could be something in business. But either way, anytime we communicate, it usually generates a feeling for the person who's on the receiving end of that communication. So for example, if I were to tell Britt, that's a very nice shirt that you have on, and those glasses are really your color, then she's already smiling and thumbs up, as you all can see. And so if I were to ask her, let's say later on in the day, to do something for me, or either to help me with something, the fact that I was positive in terms of my comments, it's a higher likelihood that she would be willing to do that. Now, I know that that's an oversimplified example, but on the other side of that, it's if I told Britt, that's really not your color, and you look more like a contact lens woman to me than a glasses woman, she's still smiling now, but I know inside she really wouldn't be smiling at that. So what I'm attempting to share with you all is, when we communicate and the words come out of our mouth, there are some things that happen in between determining whether or not we're ultimately able to influence the people that we're talking to. It could be your child, it could be your spouse, it could be someone who supports you on your team, or it could be the leadership in your organization. Now, after the feeling, if a person stays in that feeling for long enough, then eventually that feeling will become emotion. Now, this is important because, of course, any decision that we make as human beings has an emotional component to it. And what I found in my work is that a lot of times we will take out the emotional component, and we just essentially have a head exercise where we're logically looking at things and how they make sense. But when we communicate, again, we're subconsciously making these choices about, how does this make me feel? What is the indicator? And then if I stay in that feeling for long enough, that turns into emotion. And that emotion is the place where I make a decision. Now, that decision that I'm going to make is one of trust. I'm going to ask myself, do I trust this person or do I not? Now, if I do trust this person, binary decision, then I will allow them to ultimately influence me, meaning that I will allow them to influence the way that I think and also how I behave. But on the other hand, if that trust is not there, then of course the influence won't be there either. Now, I know if you look at all these words, from words to feelings to emotions to trust and ultimately influence, on the surface, they look really, really simple. But when you dig into this, or if you think about this from a deeper perspective, the feelings, the emotions, and the trust those things are things that sort of happen subconsciously when we communicate, and they're not so much exposed, but instead they're things that we do inside, and we ultimately make a choice of, am I going to follow this person, or am I going to not, or am I not going to follow this person? So going back again to where, you know, I was originally trying to figure this out, and my ratio was about 50% in terms of hit or miss when it came to influence. What I'm suggesting to you here and what I'm sharing with you here is it's important that we think about the feelings, the emotion that they ultimately generate, and then that will determine whether we get trust and ultimately influence. Now, when we talk about leadership, the thing that is really interesting here is no one person or people aren't a monolith. So what I mean by that is the thing that would cause me to be inspired and to take action versus the thing that would cause Britt or Carol to, you know, take action will be different. And that's where true leadership and true communication comes in. If you all can remember the combination locks when you were in middle school or even high school, to where you went to the right, went to the left, and then back to the right in order to unlock the lock. Well, I sort of look at this as the exact same thing. So these factors are in place and they're true and they happen every time that we communicate. But depending on who you're talking to, you may have to use a different set of skills in order to ultimately get the influence, or use different words to get the influence that you're ultimately after. Now, again, this can apply to personal situations, one-on-one situations, or it could be large group business situations as well. This is just something that we do as human beings. So now I'm happy to say, with this formula in place, and what I'm going to be sharing with you a little bit later, sort of based in this whole idea, but the one thing that I want you to take away from this is that the feelings, the emotions are critically important in determining whether or not we're able to influence other people. So I'm going to take a quick pause there for just a second, because that's the first thing that I wanted to share with you all. And I'm going to stop sharing. And I just want to see, Britt, if there are any questions about what I shared, maybe in the chat, or if someone wants to raise a quick hand, I'd be happy to entertain those questions. And as Britt said, I will put you on the spot. And so, Carrie, I might just call on you to say, Carrie, like, what has struck you about what I just said? Does anything resonate with you or give you an aha?
No, mostly I like the breakdown. I mean, we all know that people have to trust and like you to be influenced by you, but I like your breakdown. I think it's a nice example of how those things build on each other, and the importance
Okay.
is not just how you say it, it's, you know, or it's not just what you say, it's how you say it, to get somebody to be influenced. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. So I'm going with the people I can see. So Gretchen, how about you? Any thoughts?
I really liked the visual of the combination lock, and how sometimes, yeah, we have to go to the left and go to the right and go back to kind of get that combination that helps connect with people and kind of make sure that feeling that your message is being received in the way that you intended it to. Yeah, and we just have to be willing to change that trajectory and kind of wiggle the lock a little bit, I guess, if you will. So
I like that. Gretchen, I hope you don't mind if I steal that wiggle the lock line. I'll
not
give
at
you
all.
credit the first 2 times I say it, and then the third time, that baby's going to be all mine.
All yours. Okay.
So thank you for sharing. Okay, guys, so that's the first fundamental thing that I wanted to share with you. Again, the idea is we have to think about the feelings and the emotion that exists anytime that we're trying to persuade other people. In business, we have a tendency to extract the emotions, extract the feelings out of the conversation or the presentation that's happening. And a lot of times that leaves us at a point where people say, yeah, that really makes a lot of sense to me, but for some reason, they're not moved to take action. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing that I want to share with you all is this whole idea of public thinking versus public speaking. So the idea is this. I want you all to imagine, if you will, that we could snap our fingers and we could instantly transport ourselves back to a time that predates language. So you wouldn't even understand the words that are coming out of my mouth right now. Now, if we could do that and we dropped in on our ancestors, what we would find is they were heavily reliant on patterns and spaces for communication. So communication was highly visual before we actually had words. Again, it was patterns and spaces. So fast forward to the invent of language, I personally believe that we were at the apex of communication when language first came about, because we had our instincts, the things that were natural or native to us, the patterns and spaces in terms of the way that we communicated. And now we had this thing called words, and the words were sort of like the icing on the cake, where we could it basically changed human history in two fundamental ways. So one is it allowed us to put our heads together, so we could now say we're going to do this thing together. The other thing that words did is allowed us to look into the future and say tomorrow or next week we're going to do, you know, this particular thing. Now, if you will, imagine that we had two lions, one lion that's raised in the wild, another lion that's raised in the zoo. And what I'm suggesting to you is, if we were to take that lion who was raised in the wild and we were to put that lion in the zoo, and we would take the lion who were raised in the zoo and put that lion in the wild, so we just switch places with our two lions, I'm sure you all would agree with me that the lion who was raised in the wild would have no trouble finding a meal if all of the animals were let go at the zoo, right? They would instinctively know what to do. Now, the lion who was raised in the zoo, who is now in the wild, that lion is going to be a little bit clumsy in the beginning because they've been fed on a schedule and they haven't had to use their instincts. I shared that analogy with you just because that is the way that we show up as speakers. For the most part, we don't bring our full selves to a presentation or a communication, what's instinctive to us, those patterns and spaces, and instead we just focus on the words. And so what happens, or what ends up happening, is anytime that we have to communicate, again, it can be a small communication, it could be a large communication, but most of the time in those instances where, you know, we're trying to communicate, we end up missing the mark. And the reason for that is, of course, that we have abandoned our instincts. So what I'm going to share with you is just an example here really quickly of the difference and the way that I approach public speaking. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to show you all how to give a 5 to 7 minute presentation. Now, here's the thing that I want you to keep in mind. Britt is going to share with you a PDF of everything that you see on screen, so you don't have to worry about taking feverish notes or anything like that. And I am going to show you how to give a 5 to 7 minute presentation. However, the purpose is not to teach you that specifically, but what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to show you two different versions. So the first version is going to be all words, so what we typically do now when we communicate. And then the second version is going to be all pictures. And so after I've shown you both, I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll just come back and I'll be curious to know how many of you would consider yourselves to be in the word camp and how many of you would consider yourselves to be in the picture camp. Okay, so here we go. So how to give a 5 to 7 minute talk. Again, no need to take feverish notes here, but the first is the basic rules of how to give a 5 to 7 minute talk. So first there's a short open and a short close, followed by the rule of 3-2 and the rule of 2-3. And what that simply means is you have 3 main points with 2 supporting points, or vice versa, you have 2 main points with 3 supporting points. Our second bullet is to draw your window. So stay with me. I'll tell you in just a second what the window is, but you don't have to be an artist by any stretch of the imagination to pull this off. So stick figures and symbols and things like that are perfectly fine. Now, any image that you draw, you want to make sure that that image has action. The reason for that is what causes our brain, or what triggers our brains in those moments where we freeze up and we forget what we want, what we're going to say. What will trigger our thoughts faster than anything else would actually be an image, would actually be a picture, because our brains work in pictures, hence the reason for the active picture. Now, the third thing is to rehearse. And of course, you want to make sure that your images flow one into the other. And then lastly, you want to visualize to bring the images to life. Okay, so again, the purpose, ladies and gents, is not for you to remember this, but just to look at it in terms of its format. Imagine, if you will, I won't put you on the spot, but imagine, if you will, you walked into your firm and you had to stand up in front of the group and you had to teach them how to give a 5 to 7 minute talk. And what I'm suggesting to you is your first option is in front of you with the bullet points. Here's the second option. So this is the window pane that you saw on the last slide. It's just a 3x3 box, a tic-tac-toe sign, nothing fancy at all about it. But the thing that I want to point out to you all, and the thing that's really important here, is it creates both patterns and spaces, as you can see here. And so what we're doing now with these images are we're reintroducing our instincts, the patterns and spaces that I talked to you about earlier. We're reintroducing that to our communication. And in addition to that, we're relying on images because that's the way that our brain works anyway. So let me show you in pictures exactly what you just saw. So you see the clock here. The time on the clock is 5 minutes to 7. So that triggers in your mind how to give a 5 to 7 minute presentation. Then we said there was a short open and there was a short close. So you see the ruler that's chopped in half there with the open and close neon green and red signs. In a perfect world, those signs will be flashing because that movement will trigger our brains. Then we said there was the rule of 2-3 as well as the rule of 3-2, just again, meaning that you have 2 main points with 3 supporting points, or vice versa, 3 main points with 2 supporting points. Then to draw your window, so you see the window pane there with the pencil. I told you that stick figures were okay. You didn't have to be an artist by any stretch of the imagination to pull this off. We also said that we wanted your images or pictures to have action because that's going to trigger our brains. And so if you look at this image of this person who dove into the pool, we know that they completed that dive and there was probably a splash at the surface. And then our last point was to rehearse. We want our images to flow one into the other. And then lastly, we want to visualize the presentation. Now, what I'm suggesting to you here is you've seen, first of all, the bullet point version of this, and this is the exact same thing, but it's now in pictures with patterns and spaces. And so when you look at the clock here and the 2 boxes to the right, they represent everything that was in our first point. When you look at the window pane here and the 2 points beside it, or the 2 boxes beside it, that was our second point. And when you look here, this was our actual third point. And so the thing that I want you to think about is if you had to make a communication, or if you had to give a presentation about this, which of these 2 would you actually think you would prefer? Would you prefer words only, or would you prefer pictures only? And the magic and the beauty of this is you can actually do both. I encourage you to do both. Now, I'm going to show you one more example, just a live example, and then I'll pause for just a second to entertain any questions that you might have. Now, what's interesting for me and always a challenge for me is in terms of my work, I'm a speech coach as well as a speech writer. So I work primarily with executives who are making presentations inside their companies, outside of their companies. It could be large or small. And I'm the guy that they hire to say, like, this presentation is really important and we really need to move the persuasional needle here. Now, you can imagine when I get hired, and one of the first things I say to these high-level executives or people like yourselves is, we need to draw some pictures here. Like, we need some cartoons in order to make this thing work. Most of the time, people almost laugh me out of the office and they're like, who the heck hired this guy to come and help me? But I want to share with you a real life example here in just a second. But let me set the stage for you. So this what you're about to see is an excerpt of a speech from a CEO of a company of about 155 employees. It's a $20 million company that's based here in Atlanta. And the CEO was giving a presentation at the end of the year at what he calls his all hands meeting. So basically they were reviewing and celebrating, things that happened during the year, but also looking forward to set goals and things for the upcoming year. Now, this particular presentation was of major importance to the company as well as the CEO because they had changed their name, they had changed some of the top level leadership. And so he really needed to knock this out of the park. Now, the thing that was interesting about this particular client is he was the type of person who can walk into a room and shake hands and kiss babies. And in one-on-one situations, he could literally have you eating out of the palm of his hands. But if you put 2 people in front of him or asked him to step up on the stage, somehow he became a totally different person. And so his HR director, who is the person who hired me to help, clearly said to me, we want him to be the same person he is in one-on-one situations that he is on that stage in front of the whole company. And if you can pull that off, then you've done your job. So what I'm going to share with you is just, again, an excerpt from his presentation, because I don't want you to see this in abstract, but I want you to see how it would really work. Now, the thing I want you to also keep in mind before I show you this next screen is that these are the notes that he was looking at when he was standing at the lectern. And when we were done with this, he had about 14 pages of what you're about to see. So here is the first page of his notes from this presentation. And I'm just going to go through it really quickly with you. If you're at first glance, you might be thinking, what the heck is this? I will say that, you know, what I'm sharing with you doesn't circumvent or shortcut the process, right? You still have to put in time, you still have to prepare. But what I'm giving you here is a process and something that you can do on a consistent basis that will make you more effective when you communicate. So let's run through this, and then I'll stop sharing and we can have a quick conversation. So I'll start at the left and just work my way across. So have you seen Speed? It's the 94 action film starring Keanu Reeves. It'll have you on the edge of your chair because a bad actor wired a bomb to a city bus. Now, the plot twist was if the bus went above 50 miles per hour, the bomb would activate. Below 50 miles per hour, the bus would explode. Throughout the movie, Keanu Reeves has this impossible task of disarming this bomb while the bus is moving at 50 miles per hour. Now, here's what's interesting. I'm stepping out just a little bit here. Now, imagine if I were given this presentation and it was tightly scripted, either in long paragraph form or in bullet point form. What that would essentially mean to me as the presenter is I would be in presentation prison. And what I mean by that is I would not be able to stray from any of those words or ad lib at all, because when I went back to my script, which has probably happened to many of you, I know it's happened to me before, and I lose my place, that's where you start to get the sweat down your neck and things like that, and then your clock in your head starts moving really fast. But with this particular format, everything that I've said to you right now could be ad lib, and I can jump right back into the presentation. So when I became CEO back in 2006, I felt the same. The big challenge was I was trying to make change while the business was moving at full speed ahead. Now, I got to stop here for just a moment. Do you guys and ladies see this dollar bill here with the 4 quarters under it? That is making change. And that's like the height of my career. That's like the best thing that I've ever done, is come up with that little stupid drawing.
I love it. I love it. That's awesome.
All right, 10 years ago, All Good, which is the name of the company, was a big fish in a small pond. We had a lot of market share in a very small market, but we had some major challenges and some critical choices to make that will ultimately decide our company's fate. Now, the thing I want to point out to you in the middle box to the far right, you'll notice that there's no drawings there necessarily. However, that big number 2 and that big C with choices as well as critical, as soon as he looked down at that, his mind instantly knew what that was. So what I'm suggesting to you is, I'm not trying to say that we need to totally get rid of words at all, but what I am suggesting to you is we need to reintroduce these types of things, patterns, spaces, images, to the way that we communicate, because it frees us from presentation prison. And what I mean by that is it allows us not to focus on surviving the presentation or avoiding reputational harm, but instead what it allows us to do is to lean in to our audience and to connect with our audience and get the influence that we're ultimately after, because we're not so focused on the words, right? We're free. So last line here. So our first challenge was we needed to grow, but we didn't have a strategy for breaking into other markets. We had a little bit of luck back in 2007. We got some breaks. We acquired the Savannah, Augusta, and Waycross markets. We basically bought those companies from their owners. We thought we had the cat by the tail. We doubled the size of our team, and then the housing market went down and growth across the company was flat. Okay, so you can just see from that simple example there that you kind of get the point. I wanted to share with you something that was real, something that I have actually used to help an executive. At the end of it, it was by far the best presentation that he had ever given. We didn't do anything or spend time on working on his voice or anything like that, but all we did was work on his thoughts. So we fully scripted out what you saw in front of you, and then we turned it. We worked with a sketch artist who charged us minimal. I think it was about maybe $45 for the 14 pages that we had, but it was by far the best presentation that he had ever given. So before I go any further, I do want to share with you one other example of this, but I'd just like to hear from you all in terms of any questions or any thoughts you have about what you saw.
Well, Emily loves that example, so getting a lot of thumbs
And
up.
we loved it.
Yeah.
I
Thank
think
you,
that's a
Emily.
great. I think that getting stuck in your words happens so often. People get derailed and then they get
Mhm.
nervous, and it's just becomes a little cycle. I love the idea of not having them scripted so tightly that you can't deviate. I love that.
Yeah, I was just coaching somebody on Tuesday. You know, they were so nervous, and you know, their comfort zone was with the paragraph form in front of them.
Mhm.
And this is the perfect program for me to help others on, because I'm like, it doesn't matter the words you use, just hit your high points, you know, and that's exactly what those drawings keep you on track to do, is like, you know, I love that making change. And then yeah, and then you have the freedom, if something comes to you in the moment,
Correct.
you can go there, and then when you come back, you know, yeah, I just loved it.
Yeah, well, thank you. And just for the untrained eye, so the best time, or where this is most obvious and where you can see this most obviously, is if a person is doing a presentation, for example, if they're just scripted and they're presenting, and then at the end of their presentation, if there's going to be a Q&A, right? And what typically happens is the person, and if you don't know this person, right, if you work with them and you see them every day, then obviously you know who they are, you know their personality. But let's say in an instance where you didn't know the presenter, what typically happens is, you know, that person is tightly scripted. They're focused on surviving that presentation at all costs, not worried about connecting with you, the audience. And then once the formal part of the presentation is over, and now we get into Q&A, of course, there's spontaneity because they don't know what questions are going to be asked, and you sort of see the real person come out. So anytime that I work with a client, what I typically try to do is get them to tell me a story about either their job or their kids or something that they like. And what people tend to do is the smiles, facial expressions, all those things come out. But when we do business presentations, for some reason, we feel like we have to be professors and we have to be buttoned up. And we lose sight of the fact that the people that we're communicating with, whether it's internally or externally, they're human beings, right? And they want to see the expressions and all those other things. And so again, if we're going to move that persuasional needle, it's important that we focus on connecting with our audience. Now, I just want to share one more example of this with you all, because so this one was done probably about 5 or 6 years ago. The next one I want to show you just really quickly is just another example. So this is also was from a CEO. So here I sort of put the scripted comments just so that you guys can see them. Of course, I'm not going to read through all of these for the sake of your time, but I just want you to see, like, this is something that was fully scripted. In this particular example, I was working with a CEO who her company is all virtual, and none of her folks had been in person together. And so they had a meeting of their leadership, and there were about 50 people who came together who were leaders. And so I asked her, I said, when you think about your company or you think about your team, like, what does it remind you of, or what comes to mind for you? And what she said to me was, well, Dez, I played soccer as a kid. And so she said, a startup company to me is kind of like kids playing soccer. And if you've ever watched kids play soccer, it's like this big glob of kids, right? All running around the ball. All of them are kind of circled and huddled around the ball. But as they get more mature, they start to have positions, they start to have strategy, there's more space on the field and all those types of things. And so what you're seeing in front of you is that script, and she and I just kind of talking through those things. And then this next image here, so you guys can see I stepped up my game a little bit here from the black and white images. So to now, you know, I have a sketch artist that I work with on a full-time basis, and you can kind of see here just that same pattern. So starting with that box on the left, so when kids play soccer, everybody chases the ball, you know, then there's the rest of the field. So you can kind of, I won't go through this just for the sake of time, but you can kind of see this and you get the idea. So going back to sort of what I said earlier to you all about just where we are as a society, I think that with all the information that we're inundated with today, one of the biggest trends that I've seen in my industry is more of that feeling, more of that intuitive type of thing that comes into play, because it used to be that, you know, things were normal and we could say, okay, well, I'm going to look out 5 years and this is the vision for my company. But post-pandemic, of course, we all know that there is no normal right now. And I think no normal is the new normal. And so we have to be able to react. We have to be able to connect with people in those moments. And the way that we were presenting before just won't get it done. So again, I'm going to pause here. That's the second thing that I want to share with you. And I just want to see, Britt, if we have any questions or anybody want me to expand further, any comments or anything like that.
No, there's some comments on just they just love the idea. It's amazing. For me, it was my aha moment when you and I had first met. So everyone's loving it. So don't feel rushed. I think everyone likes to live there for a minute.
Well, yeah, and Gretchen and I we were just chatting because we work with highly visual people that their comfort zone is not in the auditory, but they excel at the visual. So I think giving them visual notes and letting them draw and sketch out what makes sense to their brain would be making a connection that we haven't had before in our office, and would help, I think, calm those. Yeah, it's just, it makes it their comfort zone, if that makes sense.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, one thing that I will say, I'm going to share with you all. So next thing I'm going to do is share with you some models. And give you a process in terms of how you can communicate. So if you're called on today to give a talk, or if you're called on today to have a one-on-one with someone, I want to give you a process that you can use every single time. I think one of the biggest things that I notice in terms of frustration with my clients, like you all, they're all super busy people. And then when a presentation gets dropped into their lap, that only adds to the stress, that only adds to the thing that they have to do. And what ends up happening most of the time is they end up waiting to the last minute, not by choice, but by force, because they have so many other things going on. And then it just becomes a situation where it's like, hey, I'm just going to throw everything against the wall. And hopefully one of the million things that I've thrown against the wall will stick and they'll comprehend and they'll hire our firm. And we know in reality that that is not going to happen because people have to work too hard. No one is going to sort through all of your ideas, pick out the ones that are important, and then apply them. So what we have to do, I like to use the term spoon feed, is we have to spoon feed them the information to make it easier for them to digest and easier for the information to go down. Now, that said, I encourage you all, as well as everyone that I work with, to stretch, change every model or every idea that I'm sharing with you in a way that works for your brain. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. So with the 3x3 box example that you saw, I was working with an emergency room surgeon. His name is Dr. Rogers. He was involved with the Emergency Room Physician Association. And so our work together was helping him in the politics of that group that he was working with. But I share his example with you to say that Dr. Rogers said to me flat, he's like, Dez, I'm not drawing those stupid pictures. So what else you got? Right. So I said, all right, doc, okay. And what we ended up doing is we still used the 3x3 boxes in the way that you saw them. But what he did was he put 4 bullet points in each one of those boxes and he gave it a title. So for example, opening, close. So each one of the boxes had a title and then he had 4 bullet points in it. So for his brain, he could actually see the boxes and he could see the bullet points. And so there was no need for him to draw anything because just having the space and the pattern was enough for him to show up authentically, and it worked for him. So I say all that to say that there's no magic bullet in everything that I'm sharing with you. I encourage you, invite you to change. What's most important is that it resonates with your brain. So going back to the idea that I shared about you not having to be an artist in order to pull this off, you could have a page full of drawings that no one can recognize your dog or anything that's on the drawing. But as long as you know what it is and it triggers that thought for you, then that's what's really important. And that's the only thing that actually matters. Okay, so that was my second thing I wanted to share with you all. So the first was the secret. And with that one, we talked about going from words as currency to the feelings, emotion, trust, and ultimately the influence. And again, I believe that you increase your odds significantly when you focus on the feeling that you're attempting to communicate. Then the second thing was this whole idea of public speaking versus public thinking. And again, fundamentally, my thought is if I can help you think better, then in effect, I can help you speak better, because the thing that we want more than anything else when we're communicating is for the right thought to come at the right time. And if they're positioned in a way, if they have a pattern and something that you recognize, then we increase the odds that you're able to connect with the audience, and you dramatically reduce the anxiety that you may feel when you're presenting. So those are the first two. So here's the third, and where we'll spend most of our time. And I'm going to go back to my slide here. So the third thing that I wanted to do is share with you all a pattern or a process, a model that you can use to communicate. And I'm going to share this with you just visually so that you can see it. And then I'm going to ask Britt to drop this in the chat for you, just so that you all have it. And if you want to reproduce it, you'll have it. But first, if you'll just stay with me fundamentally so that I can explain what you're looking at. So again, going back to my obsession and working with my clients, one of the things that came up is the idea that I mentioned to you earlier, where super busy people don't have time to reinvent the wheel every time they have to give a presentation. So my challenge to myself was, how can I come up with something that people can use every single time? Doesn't matter if it's a large presentation or a small presentation, and they can still get the result that they're after. And on top of all of those things, it was critically important to me that it also had the patterns and spaces, and it moved about in a certain way. So after several iterations, I'm just showing you a graphic version here, and Britt's going to drop in the chat for you in just a second, the true version, so that you can have a look at it. But conceptually, if you will, this is a baseball diamond. The reason that I chose a baseball diamond is not to get too heavy into sports metaphors or anything like that. But the reason I ultimately landed on a baseball diamond is because with most communication, you have a starting point. You'll work your way around your ideas or whatever it is you're sharing with the folks that you're communicating with. And then ultimately you'll end with either requests for them to do something, or hopefully you've imparted some new information on them. So conceptually, again, don't lose sight of the fact that what's important is patterns and spaces. So conceptually, when you look at this in the middle, you see what's called the controlling idea. And you may want to jot these things down that I'm going to share with you, because this is sort of the process that you want to use when you communicate with folks. So that center box, center circle there with the controlling idea, the controlling idea is really comprised of two things. So one is audience focused, and then the other is answering questions, some simple questions to determine what is the main idea, what is the North Star of this presentation or communication. One of the biggest challenges that I see across my work is that, people aren't focused in terms of when they're creating the presentation, again, going back to this rush factor. And so we end up just kind of putting a whole lot of things out and hoping that they connect with people. And so hopefully this will give you some sort of process. So Britt, if you don't mind dropping that document in the chat for folks so they can see it. And I'm going to just continue to talk about the baseball diamond. And if you all want to look at the PDF that Britt is dropping for you in the chat, it's the exact same thing, just a little bit less graphically appealing. So I'm going to walk through each one of these sort of stages with you really quickly. And if you have a question at any time, just let me know. So when you're thinking about communicating, again, any communication, if someone called you right now, don't answer the phone right now. But if they left you a message and you listened when you got off and they wanted you to do a presentation, what I'm suggesting to you is what I'm about to share, you can use it right then in that moment. Okay, so first is the controlling idea. So the first thing you want to do anytime you have to communicate is address the audience. And when it comes to your audience, there's really two questions that you want to ask. First is, what does my audience believe, and how are they behaving as a result of that belief? So what does my audience believe, and how are they behaving as a result of that belief? So let's say, for example, within your firm, that you want to change a process in terms of the way that you do something. And what I'm suggesting to you is, if you had to sit down or stand up in front of your group and say, hey, gang, I'm making a recommendation that we change this, the first thing that you want to ask yourself is, what does my team believe about this policy procedure? And then how are they behaving? So they may love it and everybody's doing it, or they may hate it and no one's doing it, or you may be somewhere in between. But whatever you're communicating, you want to ask yourself that question. The second question you want to ask yourself is, what do I want them to believe, and how do I want them to behave? And by asking those two questions, what do they currently believe, and how are they behaving? And what do I want them to believe, and how do I want them to behave? What you're basically doing is you're setting your start line as well as your finish line. So my audience is here, and I want them to end up here. And what happens in the middle is the communication that you have to use to ultimately persuade them. So again, it's not in every situation. For example, I know some of you may go out and do lunch and learns and things like that for your firm, and you won't know everything that every person in an audience wants to know. Like, that's not the point. But the point is, generally, how would this audience, what do they think about what I'm about to present? It could be architecture generally. It could be, what do they think about my firm specifically? Maybe they've had some exposure, but you want to answer those questions to the extent possible. And then again, look at their behavior. And then also on the other side, what's the desired belief and behavior? So that's number one. Now, for those of you who are looking at the handout that Britt has shared with you, if you look down at the bottom, that center box is part 2 of the controlling idea. Okay, remember I said that there were some questions, and it's essentially 4 things that you want to ask. You want to ask yourself, what do I want my audience to know? How do I want my audience to feel? Again, reintroducing that feeling and that intuition that we talked about. What do I want my audience to believe? And ultimately, what do I want them to do when this is over? Now, if you can answer those questions, you've essentially established your North Star, and you've established what's important in your presentation or communication, and you should be able to draw a straight line back to anything that's in your presentation. So it could be your slides, it can be an example that you want to share, it could be some content that you think is important. This is a great way for you to determine what are the things that my audience needs to know versus what are the things that would be nice for my audience to know. My mentor used to say to me when I first got started in this business, he used to say, Dez, if it's foggy in the pulpit, then it's foggy in the pews. Meaning that if I'm not clear or you're not clear from your speaking position, what you want to communicate, then there's no way you can reasonably expect the people that you're communicating with to understand what it is you're sharing or what it is you're communicating with them. Okay, so that's the controlling idea. Again, so any communication that you have to give, first step is belief and behavior of my audience, current as well as the future position. And then you answer these questions. What do I want my audience to know, feel, believe, and do? Before I move on, let me just give you an example of how I respond to these questions, and then it'll give you some sense of, I guess, the impact this ultimately has. So when I speak to audience, typically it's about either executive presence or presentation skills. And the thing that I want them to know, the thing that I want you to know is you don't have to be born with the gift of gab in order to be a great communicator. Just like anything else where you can learn skills and you can build on those skills, it's the exact same thing with communication. So that's what I want them to know. Then the second thing is, how do I want them to feel? Okay. Now, when it comes to the feeling, it may be something that I articulate directly. Hey, I want you guys to feel like this, or when this is over, you should feel this way. Most of the time, it's more subtle, and you basically use everything in your presentation to generate or to create said feeling. So the feeling that I'm after for my audiences is one of relief and empowerment. I want my audience to feel relieved in the sense that, well, the reason I was getting nervous and anxious and all those kind of things is I had one arm tied behind my back. I wasn't using my instincts and my patterns and spaces. So that's sort of an aha. So there's relief there. I'm just like everyone else. And then the empowerment is, now I understand this thing a little bit better, and I have some tools and I can use images and things of that nature. So I'm clear that I want relief, and I also want my audience to feel empowered. The third thing is belief. What do I want my audience to believe? And sort of that belief, sort of think about that with the future orientation. So what do I want them to believe is possible? I always say here that I want my audiences to believe that small changes lead to huge impacts. Okay, so what I mean by that is, of everything that I shared with you all today, if you didn't do anything but answer those questions, know, feel, believe, and do, and belief and behavior of your target audience, if that's the only thing that you did, what I'm suggesting to you is it would make you a far better presenter because you would be clear. So again, the belief, small changes lead to big impacts. And then the last thing is, what do I want my audience to do? So the thing that I want you to do is to just engage and just to try this. It doesn't have to be perfect, and you don't have to do a complete overhaul of the way that you present. So the thing that I want you to do is, at some point in your next presentation, just have a little picture there and just trust yourself speaking to the picture and see how it feels. And if you feel like you need to get back on script and back to your bullet points, then that's fine. Then the next time you present, try to have 2 images there. So spoon feed yourself into this. It's not something that you have to do a wholesale change. But again, by answering those questions, hopefully you get a feel for, you get a sense of just the clarity that that brings to what you're communicating. And again, last quick point about that is it allows you to draw a straight line back to every that you have in your presentation, and you can sort of fact check it to say, does this line up? Is this something that I actually need to communicate with my audience? Now, I'm going to go a little bit quicker here. So if we look at home plate, you see that, and this is set up as a formal presentation, but I've had people use this to do one-on-ones, to give performance evaluations. They've changed it around. It's been amazing over the years to see how different clients have used this, but I'll explain it to you from the sake of giving a formal presentation with the understanding that you can adapt it to anything that best fits your need. So you'll notice that the opening is on the right side of home plate. And just to orient you to the graphic that you guys are looking at, which is different than what you see on screen. So you see the baseball diamond in the middle, and then you also notice that there's a corresponding number with each one of the positions on that baseball diamond. And if you look, excuse me, if you look at the boxes that circle the baseball diamond, they match up to that number. So for example, 1 is the opening of the presentation that's in that bottom right corner, and the boxes just move around counterclockwise as if you were going around the bases. And this is a great document. Again, I use it for an outline. Some of my clients take notes on it when they're trying to create their presentation. So I invite you to use this in any way. So starting at home plate with the opening. So with your opening, this is where you want to grab your audience's attention. You want to pull them into the presentation that you're having. One of the things, or what I believe, one of the best ways to open a presentation is with story. And the way, for example, that I opened today, because something happened recent that was relevant to what we're talking about here and something in your industry. One of the things that I see quite often is people don't have enough story in their presentations. And the reason why story is important, well, let me say this first. When I say story, it doesn't have to be a long, drawn out story at all. But instead, it can be a client situation or something that happened, on your team, and you can use that as an example. The reason why story is important today is because our attention span has become much shorter over time. And so when we communicate with people, we need something to help carry that message for us. And when you have a story, what it allows your audience to do is focus on the story, but also attach to the story, the parts or the main things that you're attempting to communicate with them. So for example, if you were doing, let's say that you were doing a lunch and learn, and it was something where you were showcasing your firm, then you can use an example of a client, of course, protecting, their identity and all the things that you need to protect, but a situation that is similar to theirs will allow them to see themselves in that situation, and then they can kind of hold that in their brains, and then attach all the other information that you're going to be sharing onto that. So that's why, again, story is important today, because less and less can we hold on to a bunch of facts. The pique and curiosity, which is the next point there, pique and curiosity, basically for me, what that means is, how do I draw my audience further into what I'm communicating with them? So I usually do this by asking a question. And so the question that I will ask my audience is, after I've given sort of my opening story, is, are you unintentionally confusing your audiences when you speak? Are you unintentionally confusing your audiences when you speak? And when I ask that question, all I'm looking for is either to have someone give extra thought to it or to answer yes. And then I immediately follow that by saying, well, my purpose today is to share 3 ideas with you that will help you be more confident, more clear, and more compelling presenters. Right? So it's a formula that's sort of baked into this whole thing. Then with the bases that you have, so the bases represent your main points. So the way this model is set up, obviously with first base, second base, third base, means that you have 3 main points that you're communicating. Here's an example, like I said earlier, where let's say where you need to adapt this. So maybe you're saying, Des, yeah, this diamond model looks good, but the presentation I'm giving, I got 5 main points and you only got 3 bases here. So what am I supposed to do? Well, just adapt it, just change it. So put another transition line, another base line, and add 2 more bases, and now your baseball diamond has 5 bases, right? So you can absolutely do that, and I encourage you all to do that. Between each of the bases, just like 5th grade essay writing is transition, so just connecting one idea to another. When you come around third base, it's the summary of your presentation, so sort of where you wrap things up. This is also the place where the Q&A most likely happens. And then you just want to bring things to just bring the presentation itself to a close. So again, if you're talking to someone one-on-one, you can use this in those situations. If it's a formal presentation, you could use it there. I've used this model with TED speakers over the years. I've coached eight TED speakers. 2 just presented back in May with the Atlanta group here, and all of them we use this same model to sort of structure their presentation and to get things started with what they were communicating. So I'm going to take a pause, another pause here, and I do want to share with you really quickly what's on the back. There's a few different models on the back that I want to share with you, but I know I've said a lot in a little bit of time, so I just want to give you guys and ladies space to see if you have any questions at all.
No questions.
No questions?
But feel free to call out
I'll
Carrie
keep
again.
it
She kind of
rolling.
like she's missing
I'll keep
the
you guys
love.
here all day.
Yeah.
I'll keep you here all day. All right, so no
Um,
questions with that. Okay, so here's what I'd like for you to do. If you turn the baseball diamond onto the back, or either there's a second page if you're looking at it online. If you look at that second page, you should see 3 more examples there of different models. And I just want to share those models with you really quickly. So the first one should seem familiar, is the 3x3 box. I mentioned to you Dr. Rogers, who refused to draw the stupid cartoons, as he called it. But you'll notice those boxes have different titles. And so that was an idea from Dr. Rogers, and also one that I share with you. So if you're a person who has a great memory and can look at a few bullet points and remember what you need to remember, then by all means, I encourage you to use that model. The second model, the handy method, there's a quick story that I want to share with you. And the purpose of me sharing this story with you is just to show you how easy it is for you to create things like this, or models like this. So the story goes, I was working with an executive. His name was Rodney. He was in New York. He's in the financial industry. I live in Atlanta. So I was hired to help him with the big presentation that he had to give. I worked home remotely on writing the presentation. And then once it was officially written, then I was flying to New York every other week to work with Rodney on delivery of this presentation, which was huge for his financial firm. So the first week I get up there, and I could tell he hadn't spent a lot of time with the material, because his delivery, he was reading a little bit and all those things. So, 2 weeks later, I'm back again, same situation. And so afterwards, at the risk of getting fired, I said, Rodney, we really aren't like moving the needle here. In a roundabout way, I was trying to say, like, you're not prepared and you're wasting my time and I'm wasting yours. And so what ended up happening at the end of that session, we ended up making a bet. And he said, all right, well, let's make it interesting. And so what we did was we bet dinner anywhere in New York City, either he pays or I pay, when I came back in town the next time, if he was prepared and ready. And so fast forward to my next trip up, and I'm sitting in the conference room. I got my video camera and laptop, everything set up, and I'm waiting for him to walk in. And he walks in with his chest out and this bravado, didn't speak, didn't say a word. He's like, you ready? I'm like, I'm ready. And turn on the video camera. And so he's up there, and I'm like, whoa, I'm thinking this is going to be expensive, because he's really into it, right? He's speaking. And so at the end of it, I always ask my clients, tell me what the strengths were, and then tell me what are the opportunities, right? So strengths are things that you did well. Opportunities are things that we can work on and improve. And so he said a few different things. And then I said, okay, well, on the opportunity side, did you notice anything else? And he's like, no, not really. And so we're sitting down in front of my laptop at the table. I recorded him. We're both looking at the camera, and I pushed play and I said, just look at yourself. I was like, you don't see anything? And he's like, no. So I noticed that he had this weird gesture pattern that he didn't have before, and his hands are flailing everywhere. And so I look beside me, because he's sitting right beside me, and this man has got written on his hand the notes for his speech. And so these gestures that he has, he's actually looking at his hands. Now, being the shrewd businessman that he was, what we settled on was he let me have the handy method as intellectual property in exchange for my New York City dinner. Maybe I'm a sucker in that way. But that's how the handy method was born. So I shared that with you to say, like, you can create anything and make this work. As long as it works for your brain, it works. I have a whole presentation that's based on the living room of my house. And I basically move around that room from the window to the sofa, just because I know the positioning of that room. It makes it easy for me to hang ideas there because I can move around that room in my mind and it doesn't change. And that's really, really the magic when it comes to this type of thing. So that's the handy method. Again, not a lot of thought went into that. The other thing about the handy method, point number 2, is the handy method is exactly the baseball diamond. It's just in another format. So if you look at the controlling idea, which is in the palm of the hand there, you'll notice short open on the thumb, short close, right? Short fingers, short open, short close. 3 main points, your 3 bases in the middle. So of course we all know how our hands look, but imagine if you had your content just sort of sketched out on a version of your hand, you essentially just move around your hand. So again, I share this with you to say there's nothing genius at all about this outside of the fact that people just don't do it. Okay, the last one is the impromptu funnel. And the reason I created the impromptu funnel is because even people who have been speaking for a long time or professionals or the people who really, really know their stuff within your firm, if they're called on to speak and put on the spot, for some reason, our brains all just melt down. And so I'm like, I got to come up with something. I got to come up with a fix for this particular challenge. So the impromptu funnel was born as a result of my frustration. Fundamentally, here's how the idea works. So when we're called on to speak impromptu, what happens is our brains need to warm up for a bit. But that's also combined with the pressure of people waiting for us to say something. And so what we essentially do is we start talking and we haven't well formulated the thoughts that we want to communicate. So the design of the impromptu funnel, I got to be careful talking to architects about design. The design of the impromptu funnel is for it to have a wide base in the beginning and then work its way down narrow to the points or the main point that you ultimately want to make. So what happens is at this wide stage up here is where our brains are sort of revving up, where we're talking, but we're just talking broadly. And then we work our way down the funnel to get to the point that we ultimately want to communicate. So you start off with a big perspective at the top, then you give a reason for that perspective, which is a little bit more narrow. Then you give an example of that, which is even more narrow. And then by this time, your brain should be warmed up enough to where you can fully articulate that point that you want to communicate. And I'll give you a quick example of this. Oftentimes people who know the work that I do and ask questions about public speaking, I always kind of start broad. So starting broad would be, most people admit to some type of fear or anxiety when it comes to public speaking, right? So imagine someone asks me a specific question. That's how I start, because I'm just trying to get words out of my mouth and get my brain going. Then the reason for that is no one wants to suffer embarrassment or reputational harm, okay? Let me give you an example, which is a little bit more narrow. When I was a 9-year-old kid, I stood in front of the church and totally blew my part at the Easter play. And then lastly, I get to the point, right? And the point would essentially be that, like I said to you all earlier, the main thing that I want you to know is that communication is skill building, and it's something that you can learn and effectively get better at. So I'm sure you guys understand that and can appreciate it, but conceptually, it's amazing to me how if you have this pattern or another pattern that you create, for example, you can keep the funnel structure, but then just change all the words to mean something else so that, it benefits you in terms of what you're actually communicating to your audiences. So I'm going to take another pause there and just see if anyone has any questions about anything. Conscious of the time, I know we got about 15 minutes left. It's important to me that you all ask questions that are specifically related to your situations. Happy to answer those. If you don't have any questions, I do have something else that I can share with you really quickly. I can give you some just general delivery tips. But in terms of what I wanted to cover with you all, again, the secret, number one, about influence and words being currency. Secondly, it's just this whole idea that it's really about the thinking and not about the speaking. And then lastly, is to share with you these models. And the beautiful thing about these models is I've tested these models to the point where I could just lay that piece of paper down in front of someone and they could look at it, read it, and just start doing it, right? That's how easy it is. So what I'm suggesting to you all, and my hope for you all, is that the next time that you have to communicate, large or small, is that you think about these things and it's like, now I got a process. And then the more that you engage in this process, then the easier it will become for you. And you can also customize it to fit your particular need. So I'll stop yapping here, and Britt, I'll see if we got any questions. And if we don't, I can continue. Just let me know.
Well, you're doing great. You've given like 8 hours of content in like an hour. So freaking rocking it. So April, and I think a lot of us agree we'd love some delivery tips. So I think that would be a good place to go, and then we'll kind of see if there's anything else.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah.
So I'll give you guys, ladies, some delivery tips, both for on camera and off camera. The way that I do this is I'll just start at my head and work my way down the entire body. All right, so starting first at the head, starting with the eyes. So basically the eyes, of course, are important in any communication, because if you don't look at me, I don't trust you. So imagine if someone is speaking to you and they're looking over your shoulder, or either they're looking up at the ceiling or looking down at the floor, you're obviously going to think something is going on there. One of the challenges when we communicate is when we make eye contact with someone, and I'm sure you've probably experienced this before. If you've memorized something, or if you're reading something that's scripted, you can make eye contact with someone and it can totally throw you off, kind of mesmerize you by looking directly into that individual's eyes. And so the question becomes, how do I maintain that eye contact or that eye level gaze with this individual and not be mesmerized or not throw myself off from what I want to communicate? The answer to that is foreheads. Okay, so right between your eyebrows, if you were sitting across the table from someone, or if you were standing in front of a room delivering a presentation, if you look a person between their eyebrows, they aren't able to tell, even at a close distance, whether you're looking them directly in the eyes. Okay, and that's one of the tricks that we use when we communicate. A question that commonly comes up in in-person presentations is, how long should I look at someone when I'm speaking? Because of course, if you look for too long, things can get a little bit weird, right? And so it's like, how long do I look at someone? So I generally tell my clients to look at someone. You should look at someone long enough to determine their eye color, or you should deliver a complete sentence to that individual. The smaller the room, for example, in a boardroom, if you're presenting in a small room like that, or something that has maybe 20 people, every person in that room should feel like at some point you were having an individual conversation with them. So depending on how the room is set up, you can, in your mind, create different symbols, if you will, to make sure that you hit the entire room. So I'll just give you a quick example. So when I'm on a big stage and people are sitting out and they're sitting theater style, what I typically do is, in my mind, I put a big W over the audience. And so with my eye contact, I basically move that around that W. So I look at the people who are on the tip, who are close to me here, then I go back and to the bottom of that W, then I'll come back up to the center. I'll go back to the back on the other side, and then back up to this side on the front of the room. So just in a W pattern. And what happens is, when you're looking at people, as you all well know, you get far more credit because you catch people and everyone sort of feels like they're looking at you. But again, just having that pattern will help you move around the room. And you can draw any pattern in your mind. It could be a tic-tac-toe sign, it could be a letter, but the idea is you want to make everyone, if it's a large room, all sections feel like you're looking directly at them. If it's a smaller room, then everyone in the room should feel like at some point you had an individual conversation with them. The next is voice. So monotone is death. When it comes to your voice. When we're communicating over Zoom, as we're doing here today, as you can see, you can only see about 20-25% of my body. Of course, we know that a lot of communication is nonverbal. So you guys lose my legs, you lose my waist, everything else. So when you're communicating online, a couple of things to remember. One, people's attention span is super short. So please make the meetings as short as you could possibly make them. And the only way to really compensate for, missing the bottom half of the body is you got to bring energy. That energy needs to come through your voice, one, and then secondly is facial expressions. So gestures and facial expressions, all those things translate when you're communicating over Zoom, which can be really challenging. But the takeaway as far as voice is concerned is you want to think about your voice as an instrument. You want to use lows in your voice, you want to use highs in your voice. And something that's interesting and sort of counterintuitive that I love to do with audiences, like say, for example, if you really wanted people to listen to you, what most people would tend to do is speak louder. But the opposite is true, because when you lower your voice, it causes people to lean in and listen a little bit harder. So sometimes if you have to say something that's really important, you may want to lower the tone of your voice because it makes people lean in and listen to you a little bit more. But the idea, the takeaway is, again, use your voice as an instrument, highs and lows. All right, so now let's deal with fear and anxiety and where it shows up in our bodies. So fear and anxiety shows up in two places, primarily in our bodies. One is our arms, and then the other is our legs. So for most men, we wish we could just kind of screw our arms off and leave them on the table when we go to present. Unfortunately, we can't do that. So what happens is most of the time when you see people presenting formally, you'll see them doing what I call spider push-ups. So they'll have their hands here and they're doing something like this with their hands, or they may contemplate marriage. A lot of people twist that wedding ring around, when they're speaking. And what's really happening here is your fight mechanism. So because my elbow and my arms are engaged here, it's almost as if you guys or the audience, if they were going to come and attack me, I feel like at least I'm braced for that, right? And that goes back to our lizard brain. When we feel nervous or anxious, we just respond in that way. So the question is, what do I do with my arms and what do I do with my hands? Because me speaking to you like this, even over Zoom, feels much different than me speaking to you like this. It's just, it's just human nature. It's different, right? So the thing that you want to do with your arms is what I call heavy arms. So meaning let your arms drop down to your sides. And what will happen is your brain will say, hey, you're speaking, but your arms aren't moving, and that's weird. You need to do something with your arms. And what happens is more times than not, you'll go into your normal gesture pattern. So the idea is just don't lock here because this lock blocks you from your audience. So what I'm suggesting is instead of holding your clicker here in this hand or, doing the spider push-ups, just let them drop and then they'll go back into a normal conversation mode. Another quick thing about gestures, the bigger the room, the bigger the gesture. So if I were having a conversation with you across the table, then I could talk to you and I could use these gestures and these gestures would translate. If I'm now in a much bigger room and I'm trying to use that same gesture, I'll turn to the side so you guys can see this. It's more of a thing like this, right? That I have to extend my arms and engage my shoulders wider when I'm presenting in that type of environment. Another magic trick that professionals use when it comes to the arms. So for example, and it'll be hard for you all to see because I'm on Zoom, but imagine if you will, that I told you my daughter was 8 years old and she was this tall, right? So because my hand is here, and imagine we're in person, because my hand is here, my body absorbs my daughter's height. However, if I told you she was 8 years old and she was this tall, and I put my hand here, it's almost like if I look at my hand, she appears, right? So just that slight change of difference and looking this way is something that speakers use to kind of help, again, with the dramatics. So that's fight. Number one is in your arms. The second way that nerves and anxiety comes out is in your legs. And I've never tried to show people this on Zoom before, as I'm realizing this in a moment, you can't really see my legs, but trust me, there's some legs under this body. What typically happens when people are presenting with the legs, so one, they'll do what I call the cigarette butt. So they'll kind of twist their foot and their heel in the floor where they're putting out a cigarette butt, right? And then the other thing that people will do when they speak is like some people will just sway, the whole time. They'll just be up there rocking away. And then the third, my favorite thing that people do is they'll pace like a zoo animal. They'll just go back and forth the whole time, just back and forth the whole time. And you can almost predict it, like he's about to go left, he's about to go right. Obviously, that can be distracting. So what's the remedy for that? I'm not suggesting that you don't move when you communicate. You absolutely want to move when you communicate. However, you can do something as simple as raising off of your heels. And I've been doing this quite a bit today. So just slightly raising my heels, I'm dissipating that nervous energy. But what I'm not doing is moving either to the right or left. Because if I'm speaking to you and I'm also moving, then your brain has to do two things. I only want your brain to do one thing when I'm saying something important, and that's listen. Okay. The other thing that you can do is slight bend of the knee. So just a slight bend of the knee, it controls those nerves. It controls that anxiety. I still feel it, obviously, but I'm dealing with it in a more controlled way. So slight raise of the heels, slight bend of the knee, that'll get you done. Last thing I'll do before I wrap and turn it back to you, Britt, and I think this is hugely important, is the pause. So the pause in communication, wow, it's almost as important as the story. The pause benefits both the listener as well as the presenter, and here's how. So if you're the person who's speaking, when you pause for 2 beats or either 3 beats, what it does is it allows you to conjure the thought that you want to say in the next moment. What it does for the listener is you guys are listening about a half a second behind me. So everything that I'm saying, it's almost like you're listening like this. And then when I stop, what it does is sort of allow you to kind of take a breath mentally from listening. And a lot of times people talk so fast, they talk so long without the pauses, their audiences get exhausted because they're constantly doing this, trying to listen to stay with the speaker. So what I'm suggesting to you is if you pause, then that allows your audience to catch up and they sort of refresh a bit. The other thing that the pause does, and Britt, I promise I'm done after I say this. The other thing that the pause does is it can cause things to stand out in bold. So imagine, if you will, that I gave you a sheet of paper filled with words and only one of the words on that page was in bold type. Your eye is going to instantly be drawn to that word. So the question is, how do you pull that same thing off when you're speaking? And the way that you do that when you're speaking is with the pause. Because when you pause before and you pause after, what it does is it separates the words, right? And so the thing that's important stands on its own, and then it has that same effect of something that in writing being bold. So I'm going to be bold here and stop because I know that I am at my ending point. So Britt, thank you so much for letting me squeeze the juice.
My gosh, you're doing great. We
out of
don't want you to be
presentation.
done. We don't want you to be done, for the record. Everyone's like leading in, so you're doing great.
Well, thank you.
You did amazing, first of all, so you can breathe. We still got a
Okay.
couple minutes. One thing that you and I worked on after you gave the presentation, which I thought was great, was talking about soliciting feedback. And then like you offered for me to send videos and then you would critique, like, could you just touch a little bit on like, that process of like, okay, you're working on it and now you like some feedback from your team or you potentially, or, kind of those options.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so what Britt is speaking of is just, I offered her, if she had video of herself presenting, and she wanted me to look at it to see, what things I thought she could potentially do better, to send that video to me. I know that most people don't like to speak, much less videotape themselves speaking. However, if you do have some video footage around, I'm more than happy to help you guys with that. If you look at the baseball diamond, my phone number, as well as my email address, cell phone number, and email address is at the bottom of that. So if you're interested in having a conversation with me, I'd be happy to have a conversation with you. If I covered something and you're like, hey, Dez, I want a little more information about that. Or if you're curious to know, what it's like to work with me, and certainly I'm not selling to you all here, then I'd be happy to have that conversation with you as well. So I'll just leave that there.
Well, I'll sell it for you because he's awesome. And he does come into companies and he'll even do like mock interviews, and even when you're interviewing others or you're going to interview for yourself. So that was always really cool to hear. And if you end up in prison, maybe he'll be a speaker there. So that's kind of cool.
I've given up the prison. I'm out now. I've done my time.
I did want to really quick, so I definitely want to squeeze as much juice as I can. Carrie did have one question, and she said, what if you get
Absolutely.
She said, what if you get stuck in the top of the funnel and have trouble refining your point?
What was that, Britt? I'm sorry, I missed the first part of what you said.
So she's asking, what if you get stuck in the top of the funnel and you have trouble refining your point?
Okay. So the question is, if you get stuck at the top of the funnel, I'll just answer that question more broadly. And I'll answer it this way. What happens with most presenters when they speak is like we create this sort of false sense of perfection. And we think that when we stand up in front of an audience, we can't flub a word, we can't forget anything. And those are the, for those reasons, we kind of put ourselves under insane pressure. So what you can easily do is just say, I lost my thought and start over. Most people would rather die or feel like they should die if they do that. But if you think about it from an audience perspective, when we're sitting in an audience listening to someone, whether it's at work or, something social or either entertainment, we're rooting for that person and we want them to be successful. And the thing that's going to make us connect with them more so than anything else is their humanity. So just to answer that question specifically, like inside the speaking circle of professional speakers, like we often joke because we're so scripted sometimes when we give presentations and things like that. Like we'll put a aha in there, or we'll say, now where was I? And that's actually planned to be in the presentation so that it feels natural. So I say to all of you, just let yourselves off the hook. Like I said, we put ourselves under insane pressure. If you mess up, then the audience knows you messed up because they saw it. And the challenge comes in where you try to act like that didn't happen and everybody saw it. It's like, now you really got a problem to deal with. So I would just remind you that, you're a human being. The people you're speaking to are more times than not rooting for your success. So I would just suggest if you mess up, acknowledge it, keep going forward.
Beautiful. Tons of great comments. People are saying they actually can't wait to do a presentation now. I don't know how much I believe that, but it's
That's
out there.
conversion. I love it. I love it.
I love the W pattern. April says she doesn't feel afraid anymore. So yeah, you're just, I'm gonna probably beg you to come back next year. So
for sure. Well, Britt, I got one more. So this is my last
please give us one more nugget.
And I think it's one nugget that has so much impact. So get in the habit of asking people, particularly if you have a team of people that report to you, but get in the habit of asking people to tell you what they heard, right? So I'm talking to you, we're having a conversation. As we wrap things up, you say to me, hey, Dez, tell me what you heard, or play that back for me. And the reason I suggest that to you is two reasons. One is you are going to be amazed that you could actually say English words out of your mouth and ask someone what they heard, and it will be nothing like what you actually said. So what it does, number one, is allows you to get clarity on the front end. What you don't want is to leave a meeting, think everyone understands what they're supposed to do, and then you get back whatever, and you're just like, what in the world is this? What did you hear? So do that on the front end. And the dual benefit of that is once you get in the habit of asking people to play it back for you or tell you what they heard, what happens is people listen to you more intently because they know that the quiz is coming. They're like, I know Britt's going to say, play that back for me, right? And so they listen to you more intently.
Yeah.
Now, I can't tell you that this will work with kids because I'm still trying to get that part working, but with functioning adults, it definitely works. And a lot of the executives that I work with, they're like, man, of all the stuff that we've done over the years, like that one thing is really, really helpful. So I offer that to you, hopes that it will help you as well.
That's amazing. That should be a requirement to get married, is that you have to ask that at least once a day.
Most guys probably wouldn't make it, Britt. We probably wouldn't make it.
Well, Dez, my friend, it's been an honor. Thank you so much. That was a great last nugget to leave with. So we're going to let you go eat dinner now. I'll give you a call later just to connect and just great, amazing. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you all for your time. And if I can help, don't hesitate. I wish you all
You already have best 90 minutes.
Thank you so much.
Ever.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Have a good day. We'll see you in the next one.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.